Church of God World Missions has long reflected the power of Pentecost, emphasizing church planting, training workers, and caring for the needy. The motto of "Until All Have Heard" signifies its mission. In 1909, a group of seekers at the Pleasant Grove campground were baptized with the Holy Spirit as they believed the message A.J. Tomlinson proclaimed on the power of Pentecost. R.M. Evans and Edmund Barr were two in attendance who received the message, realized its truth and power, and responded in obedience. With hearts ablaze, they heard the call of God to preach the message, one to his homeland and the other to people whose faces he had never seen. Thus was the birth of Church of God World Missions. As in the days following the ascension of Jesus, they were filled with the Spirit, then thrust into nations. For the next few minutes, let's celebrate the call of the Great Commission that burned so passionately in the hearts of men and women who would leave family and friends and go into all the world with the gospel. From the moment in 1910 that R.M. and Ida Evans stepped off the boat onto Bahamian soil till now, God has called, empowered, equipped, and thrust workers into a world harvest. The visions that R.M. Evans experienced calling him to the Bahamas were soon put into action with much fruit accompanying. Street meetings were conducted along with cottage prayer meetings and services in tents. W.V. and Arabella Enos were quickly converted and called into ministry. W.V. encouraged a missionary trip to Abaca Keys. A church came out of the services at Green Turtle Key, which continues today to be the oldest continuing Church of God outside the United States. The 3 years that R.M. Evans spent in the Bahamas was fruitful. Churches and pastors were established, and the fire of God burned among dry and thirsty souls. The period between 1911 and 1926 is filled with evidence of people answering the call of God to worldwide harvest fields in spite of a depressed economy and the small size of Church of God congregations. Some of the earliest Pentecostal missionaries were members of the Church of God. One of these was Lillian Trasher of Dahlonega, Georgia, who went to Egypt in 1910, where she founded an orphanage. Lucy M. Leatherman of Greencastle, Indiana, was another early missionary for the church. In 1914, she did work in Egypt and Palestine, and in 1916 departed for Argentina on a slow steamer. On the home front, a systematic raising of foreign missions finance was introduced at the Assembly of 1913. F.J. Lee was named General Missions Treasurer in 1914 when local churches were asked to receive an offering for foreign fields each month. With announcements preceding each missionary Sunday and reports of receipts following each, the cause of missions became increasingly prominent in the church. Howard Julierot served as chairman of the Committee on Foreign Missions at the 1916 and 17 assemblies. He spoke at the assemblies on missions and pleaded constantly through the evangel for greater missions endeavor by the church. The influenza epidemic of 1918 cut short his life, but the influence of his tongue and pen has outlived even his memory. The growth of world missions took the foundations laid earlier and began to receive the formative ideas that would help to propel it to the nations. A standing board for world missions was appointed at the General Assembly of 1926 to look after the missions' interests between assemblies. Organization and strategic planning for missions matched Pentecostal passion as the 1927 General Assembly instituted a plan for each local church to raise offerings equal to 5% of the tithes, half for home missions and half for world missions. The foreign missions program of the Church of God came into its own between 1932 and 1942. This decade of expansion was the fruition of all the labors of the past. As the year 1932 began, the Church of God claimed active missions only in the Bahama Islands and Jamaica. The combined membership was 1,759. By 1942, there were missions in more than 20 countries, totaling 20,043 members. One of the main reasons for this remarkable expansion was a man, J.H. Ingram. From the time he received the baptism of the Holy Spirit in 1920, he seemed consumed with a passion to carry the message to foreign fields, thrust into nations, as it were. In 1935, he embarked on a Latin American tour from Mexico through Central America, across the northern countries of South America, back through Barbados and the Caribbean. This was a tour of making friends and establishing the Church of God in these areas. The success of this tour gave birth to a worldwide tour a year later. This 44,000-mile tour carried him into 31 countries and colonies such as Hawaii, Japan, the Philippines, China, India, Palestine, Egypt, Arabia, North Africa, and England. Ingram brought proof of the Pentecostal revival to many missionaries who heard his testimony, researched the doctrine of the Church of God, and stepped forward to unite in membership. While Ingram was in India, Robert F. Cook affiliated with the church. In a later trip, Ingram responded to an invitation from Paul Pitt to visit China. Pitt said, "Let me thank you for my appointment. It has taken 7 long years of believing prayer to be called into the fellowship of the Church of God." Soon after this, Pitt gave his life during war, choosing to stay at his missionary post rather than flee the wrath of the conflict.